It's so unexpected.
It's one of those you had to be there moments.
You had to be there.
It subsequently genuinely did change everything about my life.
You had to be there.
Right, I'm very excited about this. Paddy Agnew joins us for this week's episode of You Had to Be There. Paddy, how are you?
Good morning, Ger.
I'm sorry we're a bit late here. We got carried away there with the stories of Paul McGrath's first defensive centre-back partnership, which is a little slice of history. You have many slices of history in your 5 selections here, and I'm very, very jealous, particularly the early ones here. Your first one is Diego Maradona in Naples in April in 1987, a game against Fiorentina. Tell us about this.
Well, I mean, I picked all these things, Ger, obviously, because they were all... they weren't just good games. They were games that, in some shape, marked a historic moment in football. And for me, also, I think we all tend to feel the things that we saw when we were young were always better than anything you see today. So they have huge significance for me because I spent a lot of those early years following Diego Armando Maradona down in Naples. Now that day, the day of, we're talking about May 1987, I remember as we pulled into the train station in Naples, I was sitting in a carriage with a couple of American tourists, and they looked out the window and said, "Oh, goodness, what's happening?" Because the entire Naples was decorated in blue flags, and we had big posters all over the place saying, "We are the champions." I mean, they weren't actually the champions yet, but they were taking it for granted they were going to win. And, the atmosphere, I think it's only fair to say that not since the American troops arrived at the end of the Second World War in 1945, had you seen a more significant day in Neapolitan history, because they were about to win their first ever title, and it was a sort of coming of age and for an always underprivileged South, and particularly a city like Naples that never come close to winning a title.
When did you move to Italy, Paddy?
No, I moved to Italy in 1986, December 85, January 1986. And, Maradona was already there and he was already doing extraordinary things. And it was very, very quickly became, the biggest story that, by far the biggest football story that I covered in those years.
Am I right in saying that your main beat was actually like the Vatican and Italian politics, but the football was kind of a sideline that you managed to turn into a much more important part of your role?
No, it wasn't that. I mean, I was not quite right, because I had been the sports editor of the Sunday Tribune in Dublin. I'd written about sport for McGill, and I'd started off as a sports journalist. But since when you're living as a freelance in a place like Italy, you're going to sell what stories you can sell. And I'd chosen to come here because I thought, well, there'd be a lot of interest in Italian football, but I had also thought, there could be a bit of interest in the Vatican. And as the years gone by, I've done an awful lot of politics and news stories and Vatican stories.
You caught it was a good time to move to Naples, Paddy, and to Italy, but anyone who's seen the films on Maradona will know that he was revered anyway before the '86 World Cup. But how did it change then after the World Cup in '86? Was it almost? It's almost godlike after that, and I'm sure the reception around Maradona changed before and after that World Cup.
Well, Shane, it was godlike. And let me just tell you this: one of the things that in the build-up to that. That game against Fiorentina, the day they won the first title, there was a prayer that appeared in shops all around Naples, and it said, it basically, it's blasphemous, but I apologize to anybody who got offended by it, but he said, our Maradona who takes the field, we have hallowed thy name, thy kingdom is Napoli, lead us not into disappointment, but deliver unto us the title. Amen. I mean, he was, he was a godlike figure to
I think
a lot of the Neapolitan fans.
Pope John Paul II was the Pope at that point, wasn't he? So he was a football man. I think he was a goalkeeper when he was younger. So I don't think he would have called it blasphemous. I think he would have understood Paddy, potentially.
Yeah, well, yeah. I hope so.
I'm not sure. The great thing about this era is that it's not just defined by Maradona, even though he was the preeminent footballer in the world and the best footballer in the world, because at the same time, Silvio Berlusconi decides to turn AC Milan into the greatest football team in the world, and he's looking at the great young Dutch footballers who are coming through. We talked a little bit about Joey Malone playing against Marco van Basten for Ajax. He signs for AC Milan at the same time. Basically, the Italian league is the best league, most important football league in the world at this point, and all of the best players are gravitating towards 2 or 3 teams at those at that time.
Absolutely, you had above all, you had Maradona, you had Platini at Juventus, you had the Dutch lads Van Basten and Hull going to AC Milan. You had Zico. Zico played for Udinese, believe it or not. So you had in those days it was the Hollywood of football, and it was what the Premiership is today. Everybody wanted to play there, but that goes through. We've got 2 games here, 2 Napoli games. That April '87, the day they won the title, they beat Fiorentina, and it wasn't the excitement around the game was incredible. I don't remember the game as being a great game, but. Napoli scored Carnevale scored a goal early on for Napoli, and then a 20-year-old who I'd never seen before, who most of us hadn't seen before, called Roberto Baggio, steps up for Fiorentina, and he scored a brilliant free kick goal. And you thought, Jesus, that can play a bit.
Yeah.
And that was his first ever Serie A goal. It was a great day to score your first ever Serie A goal. But after the second half of the game, so it was 1-1 at half time. The second half of that game was basically Fiorentina it meant nothing to Fiorentina at that point, whether they basically won, lost or drew, because they were in mid-table. And basically both sides laid down their swords in the second half, and we waited for the game to get to an end, for the whole stadium to go absolutely mad. And the person who went maddest was Maradona, because he didn't come off the pitch for a long time. And I remember watching him, very, very closely. He walked right around the pitch, and he stopped about 4 or 5 times in different points, and stood there with his chest stuck out, arms wide open, blowing kisses to the Napoli fans. After the game, I remember he said, well, this is different. This is better than the World Cup I won in Mexico last year, because that was in Mexico. Here, I'm all my family's here. The city of Naples are with me because I consider myself a son of Naples. That was absolutely true. I mean, he was a son of Napoli. There's no question of that. Then a year later, Ger, we had Napoli again in the centre of what might be a passing on the baton, because that AC Milan side that was had been bought over in 1986 by the media tycoon Silvio Berlusconi. That investment was being realised, and they came down to Napoli. They needed to. Napoli were still leading the lead on the day they met, but it was like, I think, the third last day of the season. But they were a very, very good team. Virtus got a goal for them very early on, and then Maradona scored a fantastic free kick to make it 1-1. And then we got into the second half, and we had 2 sort of similar moments. Hullet twice picked up balls just inside his own half and made one of those great runs of his. The first time he set it up for Virtus to make it 2-1, and then the second time he set it up for Van Basten. And the interesting thing about that was that Van Basten at that point was relatively unknown, even in Italy, even though he'd been here for the whole season, because he had injury problems. And so it was like an amazing moment for him to come on and score the goal in a game like that. And a small thing I remember after the game, we're talking about 1988 now, and there were no mobile phones, and there was no satellite TV. It was a different world. And I was in the press room and all the little phone booths filing my copy. And who was in the booth beside me? But Adriano Galliani, the managing director of Milan, a longtime friend and ally of Silvio Berlusconi. And I heard Galliani, I was delighted to hear this. I heard Galliani saying, can I speak to Dr. Berlusconi? And there's a bit of a pause. And then he says, Silvio, è andata bene, molto, molto bene.
Wow.
It went well, Silvio, which it certainly had done. It had gone very well.
So even Silvio Berlusconi, owner of like satellite TV companies, couldn't get a dodgy feed of the game.
No, in those days,
Wow.
There was no live coverage.
Wow, that's and this is obviously just months before Van Basten announces himself as the best centre forward in the world at the Euros by absolutely sensational goal in the final that we all remember. If memory serves, it's Arnold Muren who crosses that over.
That's correct. Yeah,
Joe Malone was talking about. Yeah.
It's a fantastic goal.
It's almost like we planned this show today for these bits all to follow. That rivalry between those two clubs, it's quite explosive. There's also a memory in my mind of at least two of the three Dutch players getting sent off and taking their tops off and throwing them into the crowd. Is that like the 1990 season where there's Naples, the Napoli team drew fire from AC Milan and drove them on to the greatness that we then saw at European level?
Yeah. But there's also the 1990 season was controversial because Napoli picked up a point for having one of their players. They'd lost a game, I think it was against Atalanta, and they picked up then a point because the Football Federation intervened and gave them a point for the fact that one of their players, Fernando De Napoli, had been hit by a coin thrown by a fan, and so they changed the result of the match. And at that point, obviously made the difference.
Yeah.
And the Milan fans always said it was, Napoli hadn't deserved to win the title that year.
I can see why that would lead to certain bad blood.
Certainly did, yeah. And curiously enough, Ger, it's worth pointing out that that rivalry is still very strong. The two strongest sides in Italy at the moment are Napoli and AC Milan. And, both have done very well in the Champions League again this week.
Napoli are sensational to watch at the moment.
Napoli are sensational.
Yeah, one of the most exciting teams in world football at the moment. Let's move on to that night in Turin, where I think Roy Keane's legacy in world football terms is sealed. Like, we obviously, from an Ireland perspective, think of the World Cup qualifying campaign, his games against Portugal and Holland in particular. But for Manchester United fans, this is the high watermark.
Yeah. Can I tell you something again on a personal note? I've been here since '86. I'd never seen Roy Keane play. It was the first time, one of the few times actually, was at the stadium to see him play. But that was a remarkable game because few teams come to Turin, go 2 goals down after 10 minutes, and live to tell the tale. But there was a funny thing about that game because even when they were 2-0 down, you had the suspicion, you had the feeling that they weren't out of it. And, sure enough, they had, they played some very, very good football. And by halftime, it was 2-2. It was York and who scored the other?
Cole, I think.
Cole, yeah.
Andy Cole.
Yeah. But I mean, the man who put them back in the game was Keane. It was he scored the first goal.
That's right, yeah.
A header from a corner. And Keane was, involved in everything United were doing. I mean, he was absolutely in control of the midfield. He was absolutely he was very good in defence. I mean, he was a terrific player. I don't have to tell you that. But what I remember was that from the moment he scored that headed goal, you had the feeling that Juventus were worried about him, and they weren't comfortable. So there was a sort of inevitability about it when they got their winner in the second half.
Clive Tilsley's.
But what the point about 2-2, of course, as I remember, was that the away goals rule meant that they were already in the final at 2-2 United.
Paddy, the commentary, I guess, from Clive Tilsley is famous for a lot of people who were watching on TV. But then Roy Keane with the captain's goal for Manchester United, and I think it was full speed ahead Barcelona when Cole scored the last one. But like, his dominance was obviously apparent if you're there on the night. Like, what was the atmosphere like? There was a decent travelling United support, judging by the videos watching it back. But
there was. No, it was a great atmosphere, no question of that. And you know, the United silenced the Turin fans, the Juventus fans, to a certain extent. I remember one thing I remember about afterwards was that when the players came out, we got to talk to Roy Keane. And I remember, he got a second yellow card and he had to miss the final against Bayern Munich. And, anybody in that situation, you wouldn't have been surprised if they'd said some unpleasant things about the referee, or they had expressed their huge disappointment in not being at a final. For God's sake, I mean, it would sicken you. But Keane was very self-controlled. He was very fair. And he said, I remember him saying, the great thing is, okay, I knew this could happen coming here. I've said it before, I'm not going to tiptoe through matches, which was a great version of Roy Keane. He's never tiptoed through any match in his life.
Or anything.
But, he said, I remember he said, I knew before the game that a booking could rule me out. But I can't do anything about that now. And it doesn't matter. I'm delighted that we're the club's in the final in Barcelona against Munich.
Can I just point out as well to everybody, the midfield that he was up against was captain Antonio Conte, Didier Deschamps, Edgar Davids, Angelo Di Livio and Zidane dropping in to pick up balls deep. Behind Pippo Inzaghi. So, like,
decent, like.
Yeah. No, it was a fantastic Juventus team. It was a good team. So you had to be on your A game to defeat them. I think one of the things that I think the pace of that Man United side sort of caught a number of your European rivals off guard that season. They played with a lot of pace. They knocked it around very fast, and York in particular front gave Juventus a lot of problems that night.
Yeah, Keane's athleticism was explosive in a way that maybe people don't really notice, because he gets the ball from the centre back, he passes it to the right back, he gets it back and he passes it again. But it was explosive in over 10-15 yards, which gave him, when he was running past a centre midfielder or past a defender, all of a sudden, like, hang on, how did he get there? So, Paddy, I've got to move on. Your last two selections are both international football. The first one is June 2000 at the Euros, and it's France versus Spain. I don't remember this too much. What was the story here?
Well, no, one of the reasons I stuck this one in is because I was thinking a lot of people wouldn't have seen it, but I was lucky to be at the game. It was an absolutely fantastic game. France beat Spain 2-1. It was one of those games in which you just couldn't believe the quality of the football you were watching. In particular, Zidane again, for, it was the great French side of the day. Zidane opened the festivities with a fantastic free kick goal. Mendieta then got a penalty for Spain. It was, and then Djorkaeff got a fantastic goal just before half-time. Djorkaeff, who was playing for Inter at the time. And throughout then the second half, it remained that way until we were actually in injury time when Spain got a penalty, and they could have taken the game into extra time. Raul took the penalty and he blasted high over the bar, and France had gone through. But the reason I picked that game was the drama of that, missing that penalty at the end, the excitement of it, but just the quality of the game. And I remember talking to Mark Lawrenson afterwards, and I said to Mark, God, Mark, I don't know. I mean, I don't know much about football, but that looked to me like an absolutely fantastic game. And he said, oh, God, that was a tasty one. That was a very, very good game. I mean, there was a lot of quality there. But, you know, if you look at the film of the game now, one thing, well, I'm sure will make Manchester City fans amused. You see a certain Guardiola playing really well in that game, but at a certain point in the second half, he whacks down Djorkaeff and gets himself a yellow card because Djorkaeff was in very good form and he had to be taken down. So old Pep Guardiola, the great lover of the beautiful game, he was also capable of knocking a man down if he had to.
Yeah. Do whatever it takes. That's, of course, the same Spain team who knocked us out of the World Cup 2 years later. So I'd say people will be pretty familiar with it. That's quarter-final stage of Euro 2000. That's that France team kind of expressing themselves, having unburdened the whole country by winning the World Cup in '98, and then they go on. That's the golden goal final, isn't it?
Yeah. And I was at that too, obviously. And I definitely remember thinking that night that this golden goal is not a good thing, you know, because that game, Italy had it won and should have held on to win. And very untypically for an Italian side, they conceded a late equaliser to France. And from that moment on, you thought that France would win. But
your last one.
I remember the sickening feeling we got when that the winning goal went in. Not just the Italians got the sickening feeling, but there's a feeling of it doesn't seem right that the match is not over just because that goal has gone in, you know? Yeah,
it was the virus of Americanization had infected football. Yeah. We're like, oh, we have to do this. That's what they do in American football, and everything's great there. It's like, well, no, it's not. This last one, I think I've only met you in person once, Paddy, and it was the summer of 2006. I was touring around Germany for the World Cup. And it was kind of the end of the group stages, and we met you, and you were like, I think this Italian team, there's something about them. I was like, no, you've just been living there too long. You've got Stockholm Syndrome. And you were 100% correct. There was something brewing from that Italian team over the course of the tournament. And I think it finds full expression in your final selection here, which is the World Cup semi-final against Germany.
Yeah, no, it's a great game. But let me tell you one thing, Ger, about my prediction. I wrote a book that year, Forza Italia, about Italian football, and it came out just before the World Cup. And in my last, in the original version of it, my last chapter, I imagined the World Cup final, and I had France playing Italy in that World Cup final in my book, right? And my editor said to me, you're an idiot, you can't do that. Sure, France and Italy won't get to the final. For God's sake, you can't. We'll look stupid. And I thought about it and thought, well, he's probably right. I suppose they won't get to the final, but I did think Italy would do quite well. However, he took it out when I wrote a less outrageous final. But that night, though, at the Westfalen Stadium in Dortmund, you know, was I don't know how many of our listeners have been to the Westfalen Stadium, but it's one of the great stadia of European football and German football. It's a tremendously big stadium, tremendous atmosphere. And watching Germany playing a World Cup semi-final there, you know, Italy were up against it. It was a serious battle. And it was very, very tough. And that team, that Italian team, surprise, they got through it with their determination and above all, their defensive quality. And if you want to pick out an outstanding player that night, I'd pick out Cannavaro. Their captain, their central defender. But, you know, one other thing I'd forgotten about, that game was I looked at the highlights of the match last night and I'd forgotten that both the goals in that game came in the last 2 minutes of extra time.
Yeah. It's Grosso. Yeah.
We were all getting ready for the penalty, weren't we?
And Grosso's, it's probably one of the best celebration you'll ever see in person, Paddy, as well. At the famous run down the sideline with the hands outstretched, the most Italian of celebrations, and he's in tears as well. It was unbelievable.
It was fantastic. But you know, right? There's another thing, reason why I love that, because that match, the second goal, the goal in the 120th minute, was Del Piero, and that came from a German corner. Cannavaro burst out of the area and knocked it forward. Totti picked it up. He knocks it wide to Gilardino, and Gilardino then plays a really clever sort of no-look pass to Del Piero, who curls it beautifully past Lehmann, I think was the goalkeeper, for the second goal. And what I remember about that was, I don't know if you remember, but the disappointment of Euro 2000 when France had beaten Italy. One of the disappointments of that game was that Del Piero in the second half of that match had the chance to wrap it up for Italy, and he'd missed it. And he got slagged and criticised, and people are always reminding him how he didn't win the European Championship for us in 2000, etc., etc. Well, he laid that ghost that night in Dortmund, because he sealed up the World Cup for them.
Yeah, and what a final that was, with Zidane and the headbutt as well. My recollection of the night specifically wasn't, you picked a defender and a forward. The two midfielders, that Andrea Pirlo and Gennaro Gattuso, I think it's the greatest game Gattuso's ever played. He was sensational, but Pirlo, there was just this magnetism that they were able to control the ball and take the sting out of the Germans and the German crowd, who kind of were not fully behind the team at the start of the tournament, and then all of a sudden had kind of erupted.
They got behind them,
yeah, and they didn't expect to go that far, and here all of a sudden they were on the brink, and it was like, typical Germans. But the whole sting was just taken out of them by the two geniuses in midfield as well. So that's also on my list of you had to be there. It's all-time great sporting.
Absolutely. Pirlo, I mean, I'm glad they mentioned Pirlo, because he was like the great genius of that Marcello Lippi side. He was a wonderful player, he did. Do you remember his penalty against England in the European Championships? 2 years later,
Paddy, we're unfortunately out of time, but that was an absolutely brilliant episode of You Had to Be There. Thanks so much for sharing those with us.
You're most welcome.
It's so unexpected.
It's one of those you had to be there moments.
You had to be there.
It subsequently genuinely did change everything about my life.
I had to be there.